Well, hi everyone. Welcome once again to these lectures on the self-knowledge course. Today we're going to be having lecture number 9 of the phase A, in which we are going to talk about the inferior dimensions of nature or infra-dimensions, right? But we are going to be talking about our internal inferior dimensions. Remember that in the lectures number 5 and 6, where we were talking about the dimensions of where they are in us, we were explaining that as outside is inside, right? That as planet Earth exists these infra dimensions, right? And above exists the superior dimensions where so happens inside of us. We have these dimensions in our interiors, in our inner world. And it is important that we learn to observe our inferior dimensions or infra dimensions, because it is from there that we are going to extract the wisdom, the light, right? That we need to ascend, as they are currently trapped within all the psychological defects or wrong ways of being that exist within us, right? And this is why self-knowledge is so important, right? If we wish to understand and master the inner worlds of the planet Earth, of the solar system, of the galaxy, and of the universe, we must first learn to know and understand and govern our own internal worlds. And if we seek, for example, to know the divine beings who regulate the universe, well, actually, we must first discover and develop our own inner divinity. But to do so, we need to go down, we need to explore that shadow, that dark side in ourselves, so that we get to know ourselves, right? And that knowledge will give us access to the knowledge of all the universe and all the divinity. And well, today's topic is actually crucial because it helps us realize that yes, what happens outside also happens within us, and that just as on the bubbles of the planet, under the very epidermis of the Earth, there are these external infra dimensions. So it happens within us. We have our own infra dimensions, what we can call our atomic hell, right? So let's begin by explaining a little what is an infra dimension. When we talk about infra dimensions, we talk about dimensions or levels of consciousness, because remember that dimensions are levels of consciousness lower than this third dimension in which we find ourselves, right? So if we understand that dimensions are levels of consciousness, then we are going to understand that people call hell, or that we commonly call heaven, are nothing more than levels of consciousness, right? And that heaven, or the kingdom of heaven, resides within us, and the same though that hell actually reside within us, right? And it's important to understand that although our physical body exists in this third dimension, our psyche, along with all the psychological defects that actually have our psyche or soul trapped, they reside in these lower dimensions. These defects keep us tied to those lower levels of consciousness, obviously limiting our spiritual development. And we must know that once we have exhausted, for example, our 108 opportunities in a human cycle to do the work we came here to do, of knowing ourselves, of creating ourselves internally, of eliminating all those psychological defects, then we will have to descend into the involution process through the infra dimensions of planet Earth. And actually, that is why today's lecture is so important, because here we are going to learn to recognize and work those defects, those infra dimensions that exist within us. And we will come to understand with this lecture that wisdom arises from confronting our own darkness, right? And light is hidden within all the psychological defects, waiting to be liberated, actually, in our lower abdomen, we could find the seven doors that lead to our internal infra-dimensions, to that atomic health that we had inside of us. And this is where all the psychological defects that form our visible moon resides, because we must learn to know that we have a solar aspect and a lunar aspect. The solar aspect within us is our spirit, is that part of us that is composed of the many different parts of our inner being. And in contrast to that, our ego represents that lunar aspect of our nature. And every human being has two moons, or two aspects of the ego inside. One is the visible moon, and one is the hidden moon. The visible moon actually represents our those psychological defects inside of us that are, let's say, that easily visible and are related to our infra-dimensions, while that hidden moon is linked to the causal selves, which are the seeds of our ego, and is related to the infra-dimensions of the planet Earth. So the first step that we must do in our work is to cleanse our visible moon, the part of our ego that exists in our internal infra-dimensions. And that is actually absolutely important, because 97% of our sexual creative energy is currently trapped within all those psychological defects that exist there inside of us. And to free that energy, we must learn to descend into our own darkness, the darkness of our own psychology, right? We need to descend to that infra dimension, and we do so through the practice of self observation, meditation, and psychological depth, right? And only by doing this, we can then recover that energy, that valuable sexual energy that we need for the creation of our internal bodies. Because remember that all the psychological defects that we currently have inside ourselves were created due to the misuse of that powerful sexual creative energy, right? So if we understand that we need that energy to do this inner work, to create our existential bodies of the being, then now we need to go eliminate those defects and rescue the energy that is actually trapped within each one of them. Okay? And well, it is very important that we understand that everything in this world is dual. There is, good and evil. And the same happens with our ego, right? Just as we have negative psychological defects, we also have very good ways of being, but that are still part of the ego, that are not consciousness, because neither good nor evil is true consciousness. Consciousness actually arises when we manage to extract the wisdom from both, from good and from evil, by working our negative psychological defects and our good psychological defects. We can reach true understanding. We can actually reach the light, right? Because let's say that merely believing ourselves to be good or striving to be good people will not make us conscious beings, right? Just by deciding to do good works, that doesn't mean that we are conscious, because many times we are good just out of pride, of concepts that are instilled in our personality by our education. Many times we are good just out of what others will say of us, or out of fear of the punishment if we don't do so. And that actually is not consciousness. It has nothing to do with consciousness, right? We need to learn to work in ourselves to drag the real wisdom, to drag the real consciousness. And well, when a person decides to eliminate all his psychological defects voluntarily, then a psychological war begins. A daily battle, right, against our psychological aggregates that surface from within, to because they come, to take control of the centers of our human machine, to steal the energy of our center, including especially our sexual creative energy. And when we decide to eliminate them voluntarily, that we all have that opportunity. It's just that we decide to do so, and that we have tools to do so. Then we start that that inner war, right? And we start practicing the psychological death, And while doing so, we start cleaning our internal infra-dimensions by eliminating those psychological defects and rescuing all the wisdom that is trapped within them. But if we do not choose to do this work voluntarily within any of our 108 human existences, we will inevitably have to go through the process of involution, descend into the infra-dimensions of planet Earth. So the psychological defects are involuntarily and, of course, painfully disintegrated by nature. And well, while we go through the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms, right, cleaning all our soul, and but losing all the wisdom that was gained from that turn on the wheel and having to start a new cycle on the wheel of samsara, a new process of evolution, to see if in that process, when we reach the human kingdom, we decide to do the work voluntarily, right? And well, now that we have this knowledge, it is important that we encourage ourselves to do this work consciously and voluntarily so that we extract the wisdom so that we can free ourselves from all those psychological defects, so that we can free ourselves also from this wheel of samsara, achieving the self-realization of the being. And well, just as in the inferior dimensions of planet Earth, we find the nine Dante circles, right? Described by Dante Alighieri, in the Divine Comedy. That is actually very true. In our interior, we find that same structure, those same nine spheres, because as it is outside, it is within, right? And these spheres correspond to the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And within each of these spheres, we are going to find specific types of psychological defects that are there grouped in that sphere according to the law of affinity. And then we need to recognize that these infra-dimensions actually exist within us. Now that we are going to see a resume of each one of them, we are going to be recognizing that yes, that in all of us we have these spheres and we have all those defects. And if we want to purify ourselves, if we want to attain that inner freedom, to awaken our consciousness, we need to work on eliminating these defects. Only by doing so can we raise our levels of consciousness, because true elevation in levels of consciousness is impossible without first eliminating, removing from us all that is heavy, all that is the impure in our interior, right? Well, now let's examine each of these spheres or infra-dimensions and the main psychological defects that are associated with each one of these infra-dimensions. The first infra-dimension is the sphere of the moon. And this one is related to the defect of laziness within us. And it is also related to all of those who have not been baptized, right? We need to know what is real baptism, because we only have a concept about baptism, right? And well, the fact that the first infra-dimension is related to laziness reveals to us that the first obstacle that we must overcome in inner work is our own laziness, because it is laziness that prevents us from beginning both the inner work on ourselves and the essential work with the sexual creative energy, right? Actually, the path of self-knowledge is about spiritually creating ourselves. But laziness actually hinders all creation. Leads us all the time to waste energy on idle things, to spend our lives chasing things that do not truly contribute to the awakening of consciousness, and having all this ill will to do the things we must do. Because laziness actually manifests like in two forms. It has two poles, an active and a passive. And both of those poles of laziness actually prevent the inner work, because active laziness makes us like indulge in leisure. idly wasting our time doing nothing, while passive laziness make us diligent in everything except for the things of our consciousness, for the practices to awakening our consciousness. Because due to that laziness, we are full of ill will, right? And well, it is said that those who have not been baptized remain in this first circle. But it is a true baptism is not merely an external ritual, okay, of pouring, just water on a child's head. That is only a symbolic representation of a real process, of our inner process, because real baptism actually involves raising our inner waters to our head. And that is symbolizes the work of the sexual transmutation and of spiritual birth. A truly baptized person is one who has overcome his own laziness, who have started working on himself, who has eliminated his fornicating eye, right? That is the eye in us, the defect that leads us to lose all the time the sexual energy for mere pleasure. And well, actually work on the sexual transmutation, right? Because to be baptized means to achieve chastity, means to consciously transmute those inner waters of or sexual creative energy, and raising it vertebra by vertebra up to the spine to the head. That is the true significance of the baptism. And those who have done that work, right, raising those inner waters through sexual transmutation, actually liberate themselves from the first infra-dimension, which is the sphere of non-creation due to laziness, right? And as you can see, this infra-dimension is conquered through action, by doing the things we know we must do. And this first sphere is related to the planet Moon and to the sexual center. Actually, it is in this center that we find the atom of the secret enemy, which is the Antichrist within us, which is the one that is there, preventing the execution of all actions, of all work within ourselves. And well, let's talk now a little about the second infra-dimension. This one is a sphere of Mercury, and it is related to our seminal waters and related to our instinctive center. Actually, in this sphere, we find our fornication. All our fornicating eyes are there. Those aspects of ourselves that fail to value our sexual creative energy. Well, actually, humanity in general doesn't recognize the importance of the sexual energy. We actually waste our sexual energy through orgasm and ejaculation, unaware, totally unaware that this very fluid is what allows us to create ourselves internally and to transform ourselves. Because of the immense power that is contained in sexual energy, we see that in this world, everything is constantly encouraging us to misuse this energy. Like everywhere we turn, we find influences, we have methods, we have distractions, we find temptations that are actually designed to make us waste our sexual creative energy, because society has normalized fornication, right? And has normalized it to such an extent that even in schools right now, we find that they are teaching children to masturbate, actually initiating those children, right, from a very young age to that harmful habit of expelling their sexual energy through masturbation. And you see that pornography, you see that the music, that the dances, all of that is actually contributing to the loss of the sacredness of sexuality, right? Reducing sexuality to a mere animalistic act, and making us understand that sexual energy has no value at all. And that is not true. But well, all our psychological defects are actually nourished by fornication, because every time that we lose our sexual creative energy, we are feeding our ego, right? And we are strengthening all those defects that we are trying to eliminate. So that is why it's very important that we start observing and eliminating all the details of fornication in ourselves so that we can free ourselves from this infra-dimension, right? We need to attain chastity. Yeah, but that is actually understanding the value of our sexual creative energy, recognizing its power, right, and being completely determined in our efforts to overcome lust. It requires studying all the defects that at every moment try to push us towards wasting our sexual energy, right? We must work on those instincts, those sensations that are instinctive that prevent us from having full control of our sexual apparatus and of our sexual creative energy, right? So through psychological death, we must work to erase those deeply ingrained like memory of orgasm, ejaculation, and all those sensations of rushes to over excitation and to fornication. All of that is there recorded in our instinctive center. And we must work on psychological death to eliminate all those sensations so that this no longer causes to fall during the sexual practice. Because remember that chastity is not about uh, it's not about refusing sex. It's about learning to go to sex wisely. Not going to sex to expel the sexual energy, but to transmute it, to join our partner sexually, and to activate the sexual energy, right? And to make ascend that energy through our spine, which is a superior form of sex that we are teaching in this self knowledge course, right? And well, what else? It is also important to analyze all the damage that fornication, whether through sexual intercourse or through masturbation, has caused us. Right? We can observe its effects. Like for example, the premature ejaculation is actually a result of the fornication, of masturbation, of expelling sexual energy outside our body in sexual intercourse. Also, impotence, yeah, because of the violence that we are causing to our sexual apparatus while we fornicate. And also, homosexuality comes from here, comes from masturbation, and comes from extracting too much that fire from our body, right? And we also have even the destruction of many brain neurons as we constantly expel the sexual energy from us. When we constantly deplete ourselves sexually, we weaken our own strength and our own vitality, and we are left without even the inner fire, the energy that we need to face all the challenges of life. So we need to sit down a little and reflect on all these damages so that we encourage ourselves to work against fornication. Actually, by working on this inner infra dimension, we reclaim our power and our energy, which are essential forces for carrying out the great work of our being. So that is the work on the second infra dimension, and as we can see, all of us has all those defects inside ourselves, right? And well, the third infra dimension is the sphere of Venus. And that sphere is related to all our pleasures and desires, and also related to our emotional center. Here, we are going to find all our pleasures. Example, the pleasure of eating, of drinking, of dancing, of smoking, of taking drugs, right now. The pleasure of partying, of working a lot to have a lot of money, the pleasure of criticizing others, the pleasure of falling in love, etc. All that we call pleasure, but that always end up in suffering, is going to be here. All the defects that cause all these pleasures and sufferings inside of us. But it is interesting to observe that also in suffering we find like pleasure. For example, the pleasure of crying, right? The pleasure of complaining and to be heard, the pleasure of telling our problems to everyone and that they know what happened to us, that they know that things have gone very wrong for us and that we have a very bad time. We also find a pleasure in that, even if when we are sad, you can see that what we do, instead of working on the sadness, instead of working to get out from that wrong inner emotional state soon, what we do is that we nourish that sadness and we put on sad songs to be sadder and we continue like enjoying the pain so that you can see that we make pain a pleasure. And the problem with all these pleasures and sufferings is that they make us lose enormous amount of energy, right? Like because all of these defects of biting, of laughing, of having biases, of falling in love, of disappointment, depression, self pity, etc., feed here, and they feed off enormous amounts of our energy, right? And well, in this circle, we actually find the desire in us, who works as our psychological trainer, and that is our inner Lucifer, who is there all the time tempting us and testing us. If we learn to defeat desire, we become masters of the fire and of the light. But if we don't defeat desire, we become his slaves and we can never stop being what we are. And you can see that all day long we have thousands of desires, right? Desire to criticize others, desire to drink, desire to fight, desire to masturbate, desire to smoke a cigarette, desire to watch pornography, right? Desire to cry, and so on. And when a desire is felt in our emotional center, you can observe that it's like a fire. So we must understand that desire is actually the source of all strength. With desire, we have two options. Or we refuse desire, or we surrender to desire. Because pleasure is just like a bait that our inner defects give us. And always is like a momentary pleasure, and always will end up turning into pain. So if we always fall for the same bait because we don't realize that real happiness is not in none of these two poles. It's not in pleasure, it's not in suffering, but it's in the center, in the real center, right? We are going to end up losing our inner fire. We are going to end up all the time surrender through desire and becoming more and more enslaved by desire. Okay, so to work this third infra dimension, we must learn to refuse each one of our egoic desire so that we can recover the fire, the energy, the spirit that we need to make this inner work and to make our inner creations, right? And that fire, that spirit, will allow us then to do the things of our consciousness. We are going to have fire to meditate, to achieve conscious astral projections, to teach others this knowledge, to practice supersexuality, and then to really start seeing progresses in our inner work. And well, that is the third infra dimension. Now let's examine the fourth infra dimension, which corresponds to the sphere of the sun. This one is related to our imbalance and is also related to our lower intellectual center. And our inner imbalance is generated by our wasteful defects and our hoarding defects, because both of them lead us to misery, since our imbalance always end up turning us into beggars, right? Our wasteful defects are the ones that always want to throw away all our external and our internal wealth. Our wealth actually is our energy, is our time, and is our money, right? And we must understand the need to eliminate these defects of these spendthrift defects, right? To keep us in balance, right? Because they lead us to material and to also spiritual misery. And we must also observe the other extreme, our hoarding defects or our stingy defects, which don't invest in our inner wealth, in our external wealth also wisely, because they just keep it, they retain it, and then prevent us from wisely invest that wealth doing what is need to be done. And what happens when we just like hoard things? Then there comes those thief selves, those thief defects inside us that steal it. And that turns us into beggars because they don't allow the construction of the existential bodies of the being to be done. So, if we really want to achieve balance, external economic balance, internal economic balance, on energy, on time, on money, also we need to work on this infra dimension and these defects that make us experience all the time this inner and external misery. And well, that is the fourth infra dimension. The fifth infra dimension is the sphere of Mars. That one is related to our motor center, which is the one that manages our actions and our words. And here we are going to find the force, the good or the bad use that we make of the force. So here we are going to find the defect of anger, which is the one that makes a terrible use of our inner force, and that actually is the one that has trapped our inner force. You can see that anger, manifests in us through words, through actions, and even through omissions. When we don't do out of anger what we must do, for example, to help others. Anger, it is expressed in us in insults, in shouting, rudeness, and physical aggression, and for example, ignoring others, in sarcasm, right? Or withholding help others out of resentment. So I was saying in the case of omissions. And well, although we all of us possess great strength, it is often misdirected by anger, because anger holds what is in this dimension, this infra dimension holds what is our willpower. So if we want to take the force out of anger, we must learn to study all the details of anger that manifest in us in our daily lives. And in order not to fit these defects, we must learn to change our way of reacting, because anger tends to arise like instantly. Let's say when someone, for instance, offends or blames us, or when we experience fear, or when we experience frustration, or when we feel that guilt or doubt. Actually, we react mechanically with anger. So we must practice self-observation at all times to learn to identify the specific triggers of our own anger and to stop it through psychological death. It's like in those moments when anger arises, we must observe it, understand that it's actually anger taking let's say that government of our inner centers, and we must ask our divine mother to eliminate both the impulse to react and that inner trigger, that internal cause behind that reaction on anger. And that way we are going to see the results. If we don't react, we are going to see that the mind will try to convince us. Yeah, the anger is going to be acting there in our mind and telling us you cannot let that person humiliate you, you cannot let that person ignore you, you cannot let him disobey you or whatever. But if we observe that also, we observe that reaction in our mind, and we eliminate those defects that is there talking in our mind, that are there talking in our mind, and we don't react, right? Then we are going to manage to control ourselves, and we are going to regain our inner strength. We are going to take away that inner strength, that inner force from anger. So we need to reflect on this, and we need to get to understand that an angry person is actually someone very weak who has no strength of his own, has no ability of self-control. So it's actually very weak. When we are angry, we like lose control of ourselves. And there are these specific situations that trigger anger, and that make us repeatedly fall into the same pattern, the arguing, shadowing, attacking, only to later regret it, crying or lamenting the consequences of anger, right? A person free from anger can handle any situation calmly and consciously. Okay, because many times we think that we need anger because anger is what saves us from people who want to humiliate us. That if we tend to believe that if we eliminate anger, we are going to become submissive people, people full of fear. And at all, actually fear is just the other pole of anger. When we manage to eliminate anger in both poles, in the one that is violent and in the one that is submissive, then we regain conscious. And a conscious person who is not managed by anger can solve any situation with patience, right? It has a lot of self-control, and is one who cultivates true willpower. So that is why it is so important that we learn to observe and to work on the defects that lives here in this fifth infra-dimension. Let's now see the sixth infra-dimension. This one is the sphere of Jupiter. Here we find our tyranny. This infra-dimension is related to our superior emotional center. And actually, Jupiter is like the giver, the generous of the solar system. And in opposition to what Jupiter in its elevated or positive aspect is, in this infra-dimension, we have our tyrannical defects, right? Actually, tyranny gives, but expecting something in return, and never respect the free will of other people. And what makes tyranny particularly deceptive is that tyrants often mistake their control for love, right? So these I share a common trait. They believe that they possess the absolute truth. Convinced of their own righteousness, right? Those defects in us like to impose our will and our beliefs on others, even at expense of their freedom, what they choose to believe or not. For example, there is tyranny in relationships when we expect or want even to force a partner to act, to think according to our desires. There is tyranny in the workplace where we dominate our employees and make them do what we want and force them to do what we want. There's tyranny over our children when we force them, for example, to eat what they don't want to eat, what they dislike, when we force them to study what we believe is the best for them instead of what they truly want, or when we want to come into their lives and make them marry, for example, someone we consider suitable for them rather than allowing them to choose their partner. Actually, that is our tyranny. We are actually tyrants with everyone. When we want people to think as we think, to like what we like, to believe what we believe, we are being tyrants. We are moved by these psychological defects. We are tyrants when we don't want to allow others to act with free will. And we want people to do what we want them to do, believe what we think is true, and so on. So here in this infra dimension, we find all kind of these dictators. Actually, our inner titan is always seeking for someone to dominate. And the more power we acquire over others, the more dangerous our inner tyranny becomes. And the problem is, as I was saying, that this defect deceives us. We justify it because we believe that we are acting out of true love. But we must reflect that true love actually is respect. is respect that is full respect, whereas our tyranny is arrogance, is selfishness. In our blindness, we want to impose our will uh, in others, right? And we end up making the lives of those around us miserable, right? And well, to work on this infra-dimension, and to come to clean all those infra-dimensions from all those tyrant defects that we have, we must start studying and eliminating all our tyrant and dictator defects. Those who don't let others to say or to act with free will. All of those who attempt against love and against the divine, all the blasphemers inside of us, the skeptics, the materialists, the atheists are also here because also the atheists want to impose their atheism into everyone, right? And in return, if we work on this, we are going to receive wisdom and we are going to recovering or even to get to know what true love is, right? Which is the ability to give but without expecting anything in return. And well, that is the sixth infra-dimension. The seventh one is the sphere of Saturn. This one is related to our superior intellectual center. Actually, Saturn is in charge of the management of nature, right? And in this infra-dimension, we are going to find all the crimes against the Holy Spirit in us, against nature, and all the violence against art and against God and against ourselves. So here we find all the psychological defects that make violence, right, against what that is superior. For example, we find in ourselves violence against the Holy Spirit, which is our sexual creative energy and our creative capacity. And we find violence against art, which is the sexual practice, in all our fornication eyes, in all our fornicators, our inner fornicators, in all our masturbators defects, in all the homosexual, lesbian, adulterers defects that live inside ourselves. For example, also there is violence against sexual energy, the Holy Spirit, and against art, which is the sexual practice, and our defects of lasciviousness, right? In the defects of pornography, in prostitution, and in those defects who like to practice sex with animals, for example, those who likes to practice sex, let's say these forms of sex that are actually masturbation, like anal sex, like oral sex, in all the homosexual defects, in all the sexual abusers, those who have sex, for example, several times a day, are actually making violence against their own sexual apparatus, against their own sexual energy, that is against the Holy Spirit, right? And against the very art, which is the practice of sexual transmutation. Also, here we find violence, for example, in those defects in us that wants to force our partner to have sex when he or her doesn't feel like doing so, or those who likes to copulate when the woman is pregnant or when the woman is menstruating, the same, right? The rapists here we find, and also those who spill energy outside the temple, outside of the body, right? Also, there is violence in those defects in us that likes to use contraceptives, of course, to keep fornicating, and those who abort, right? Those who castrate themselves, that is here violence against the Holy Spirit. Those who make the animals become castrated, sorry, also are here. Those who do grafts because they are violent again, making violence against nature. In our eyes of witchcraft, in our eyes that criticize, that slander, all of that is violence. So we must work on all those defects that makes violence again against us, especially the ones that make violence to the sexual energy and the sexual practice. If we really want to attain purity in sex, and if we really want to reach true practices of suprasex, we must know also that there is violence against God in all those controls of the intellect that deny the man their spiritual possibilities. Also, we find here the violence against ourselves. For example, in the suiciders, in the ones who damage or mutilate their bodies, through tattoos, through piercings, and so on. That is violence against ourselves. And the ones, for example, that they starve their bodies on those diets, on those, yeah, that actually are making the body suffer. We also find here those who are violent against their own property and the property of others. And another thing is important to observe. Our relationship with Mother Nature, because here in this infra-dimension also reside all our psychological defects that are responsible for the environmental destruction that we are perceiving right now. The pollution of waters, the pollution of the air, of the soil, right? As well as the harm that is inflicted upon the elementals of nature. So we must observe all of this. And from this work, if we decide to work on all this in ourselves, is from where we are going to rescue all the gifts and all the powers of the Holy Spirit. That is why it is very important to work on all this violence. And well, let's now see the eighth infra-dimension, which is the sphere of Uranus. Uranus is actually is related to the force of the Holy Spirit. It's totally related to the sexual creative energy, to our Divine Mother, because Uranus represents the word itself, the truth, right? And is the in this sphere, on the contrary, we are going to find all our defects that are related to lying and to forgery. Or our fraudulent defects are found here. So he refined all the counterfeit feeders of religions, the counterfeiters of money, the imitators, incestuous, the sowers of discord, the bad advisors, the black magicians, also who invite others to fornicate, who hide the real truth about the sexual energy and about the superior sexuality, and are there, for example, under those religious vestments, telling others that fornicate is actually blessed by God, that is something natural, that the opposite is the anti-natural thing, and so on. Though all those effects are found here in lion. Also, we can find all the ways in which we lie along the day. We must find also those defects in us that makes promises and break their promises, because there is lie. We must our hypocrisy is found here. All of those defects who twist the truth are here. So to combat this infra-dimension, we must live in search of the truth, because every lie we tell create like countless like ties, like chains, in all those entanglements. And one lie requires many other lies to sustain it. And before we realize, when we enter the path of lying, we become trapped in that web of deception, harming both ourselves and others in that process. Okay, so we must deeply reflect on the consequences of lying, how it damages those around us, how it corrupts our own being, and how lying distances us from our inner Christ, which is the incarnation of the truth itself, right? And well, now to finish, let's see the ninth infra dimension, which is the sphere of Neptune. Right now, here we are on the sexual apparatus, and here we find all the treasures eyes of our psychology, right? Each one of our desires, each one of our justifications and washing of hands, and each one of our ill wills that all the time prefer to do the will of the ego than that of the consciousness. So there is treason every time that we feel that desire. We know that we must not surrender to that desire, because actually we are there like giving away our energy, our consciousness, but we justify that desire. We justify why we are going to do so, or to omit doing what we know we must do. And when we justify, we fall into the ill will of doing the desire of the ego. There we are actually betraying our unconsciousness, right? Here in this in ninth infra-dimension, we find the most terrible defect of all of our defects, which is treason. This is the force that across countless of existences has kept us from accomplishing the work that we came here to do, which is the work of self-realization. It is treason, the defect that continuously betrays our inner being, that betrays our inner consciousness. And even though having this knowledge, because I'm sure this is not the first time that we are receiving this knowledge on the three factors for the consciousness revolution, but all the time we fail for the same. All the time, even though knowing what we must do, we end up doing the desires of the ego. We end up omitting what we need to do towards the awakening of our consciousness, and it is out of the ill will, out of this treason that is alive within us. That in the astral plane we can commonly see these defects as cats, right? So every time that we have this dream with cats, they are showing us our treason, our treacherous defects, right? And well, each time that we experience an egoic desire, right? And we justify acting upon it, and we commit the act of ill will, doing the desire of the ego, we are selling our consciousness to satisfy our ego, and that is treason. So for our esoteric work, we must discover each one of our traders' defects that manifest throughout the day to start rescuing and awakening our consciousness. And well, people, all those are the 9 infra-dimensions. It is precisely the work we do to discover and eliminate all these defects from within, which is known as self-knowledge, right? Because by eliminating all the errors within us, by eliminating all our darkness, we will get to know and develop what we really are. Our inner being, 97% of our inner being is there, trapped within all those psychological defects. So 97% of all our inner light is there, hidden beneath all of this darkness that are actually within ourselves. And it is from these infra dimensions that will come the light that will illuminate our interior darkness, and or what is known as the wisdom from evil, right? And the love that is trapped in all those defects will arise from the work we do on this. And we will achieve this by the constant practice of psychological death. And well, people, this has been today's conference. I hope you find it very useful for your self-discovery process. And well, I want to invite you to our next lecture, in which we are going to be talking about the 7 bodies of the being. We are going to see that we not only have the physical body, but 7 bodies. We are going to know their characteristic, the process of creating them. So don't miss that interesting lecture that we are going to be sharing with you next Monday. And remember that if you are not yet part of our WhatsApp or Telegram groups, here in the description of this video, you can find the link to join our groups and receive all this lecture, complementary material on each of these lectures. And remember that all of this is shared for free. And if you have any question on this topic or any of the topics on this self-knowledge course, please leave your questions there in the comment box, and we'll be gladly solving any question that you have. Okay, so thank you very much, and see you the next time. Bye bye.